That's more a reaction out of what's being described as the biggest ever shake-up of the welfare system. It really is the biggest ever shake-up because it's crossing so much of the whole spectrum of the welfare system. Let's go to Darlington. We can talk to the Paralympian and campaigner, Dame Tanni Grey-Thompson. A very good morning to you. We know within this whole debate the rights of people with disabilities, the effect it will have on those people who either have a disability or live in the same house as someone who does. It has been really at the fore of a lot of the discussions this morning. What is your view on what effect this will have?
It's going to be really hard on a number of disabled people. It's not just the change in social housing, it's the effect of the change of disability living allowance. You know, there's going to be a huge number of people who don't make the transition to personal independence payment. But it's also the changes to legal aid, where welfare benefits are now out of scope. And actually, if you look for disabled people, it's going to be incredibly hard for disabled people to access legal aid. The only way to do it is through a telephone gateway, which for somebody with a learning difficulty or somebody who has communication issues, where they've got very complex problems, it's really hard to explain. So disabled people are going to be hit in a number of ways, and we're not really going to see the effects of it for probably about 18 months or 2 years.
It's interesting that even the idea that someone who is severely disabled, and particularly someone with a, as you mentioned there, a severe learning disability, would need to challenge what they're offered in terms of benefit. You would think that would be a priority, would be getting that right for someone in that position.
Well, the government has always said, and you know, I think everybody agrees with it, they want to help the most vulnerable. The difficulty where you actually cut support from people who are sort of in the mid-range is that it actually might push the cost somewhere else. And that's actually, you know, that's an awful lot of what we've been doing in the House of Lords, is sort of asking the government to think again about what they're doing, because the real danger of all this is we might appear to be saving money in the short term, but we actually might be pushing the cost somewhere else, either to local authority or, you know, to charities. And that's not a great place for disabled people to be. And, you know, there are some really good things in universal credit. I think generally across the whole floor of the Chamber of the Lords, people agreed that universal credit was a positive thing. But the difficulty is we're not going to know how the cumulative impact works, because if people are on housing benefit, they're likely to be on other forms of support as well. And, you know, to be honest, if I was the government, I would have been reluctant to do a cumulative impact assessment, because it's going to be quite stark. And, you know, the worry is that it's almost going to be too late before we can, you know, pull people out of trouble. And I think, you know, our kind of role now, you know, I'm a crossbench peer, is to look at all the different ways that people are going to be affected, look at all the review points, and actually go back to government and say, look, you know, if it's not working, if people are being pushed into greater poverty, then we need to think about this again.
You talk about mid-range people. Are you effectively talking about people with a disability who may be capable of doing some work and therefore will lose some benefit as a result of that?
Absolutely. Well, things like disability living allowance is a benefit which goes from £20 a week to £130 a week, depending on the level of support you need. And DLA is really there to buy people's rights for living in an inaccessible society, because public transport is not great throughout the whole of the UK, because access to goods and services is not great, you know, because people need a little bit of extra support. And that's what DLA is for. And with the changes there, you know, I know people who use it to maybe get somebody to do their shopping, or to change their light bulbs, or to give them a little bit of extra help at home. If people lose that support, then there's a real worry that instead of people being able to live independently, they might actually need far greater support. They might need to go into local authority, supported housing, which costs far more than people living independently at home. And it's really hard, because there's lots of figures that are bandied about how much is going to be saved and how much is going to be costed. You know, we're probably not going to know for a while what those true figures are, if we ever really know. And it's only when people might be forced to move out of social housing. Actually, if they move into the private rented sector, that's going to cost more than in housing benefit than keeping people in social housing. So it's a really tough time for an awful lot of people. A lot of people are worried about the changes that are coming, and it's quite hard to offer, you know, absolute positive reassurance, because, you know, there are so many changes coming in essence in one go.
Forgive me if this is too simplistic. I do say it with a sympathetic view. I mean, I have disabled members of my own family. But with all of this, is part of the change that we're seeing here, part of our national change that we're seeing. It's not that long ago, is it, that we looked at anyone with a disability with a sense of pity. I guess that was the sort of the general view. Our attitude in the UK has changed dramatically over recent decades, to the point of last summer, as you're fully well aware, you know, there's certain people in this country with a disability we were regarding as superhuman. Bearing that in mind, isn't it right that we are expecting more of people with some level of disability now in the UK to actually get out there and get a job? I mean, with some level of support, of course, but we are expecting them to get out into society and do more.
You're absolutely right. You know, I've been in a chair since I was 7, and, you know, back in the 70s, disabled people were locked away, were completely and utterly excluded from society. There's been a massive change where you do now see disabled people on the street, and I absolutely believe disabled people should be in work and should be contributing, should be paying taxes, and some people need a little bit of support to make that happen. You know, an awful lot of disabled people are in work, but at the moment, you know, when we're in tough economic times, it's not that easy, and there still is some very low levels of discrimination out there against disabled people in work or trying to get into work. And that's kind of a cultural change we need to have. You know, all through welfare reform, we were trying to look at it from a different perspective. And unfortunately, you know, the argument got lost in sort of the midst of doing things which are much more important, but actually looking at it from saying, if we can give disabled people a little bit of support, what more could they contribute back? And unfortunately, that just never really gets debated. But disabled people should be in work, but they should get a little bit of support to do it. And the danger is, by removing support, we could make it just much harder. And I guess when times are really tough economically, that's where people tend to turn in a little on themselves, and that's where we start to hear about, whether you want to call them benefits scroungers or, you know, strivers and skivers, whatever you want to call them. I think that's when the sort of times get really hard, and I think if we can fight our way out of the economic sort of challenges we're going through, there'll be a bit more of a positive attitude towards disabled people. But the worry is, at the moment, disability hate crime is at the highest level it's ever been in 10 years of recording. There was a report out last week, saying that actually CPS lawyers are struggling to identify and really target disability hate crime. So I think that shows actually where we are as a society. We're looking at disabled people as kind of sucking money out, as opposed to looking at how they can contribute.
Dame Tanni Grey-Thompson, really appreciate your time this morning. Thanks very much indeed.